Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and today's video is going to be covering a topic that's been around in 14 for quite a few years. The ranged tax. Yeah, it's a pretty dramatic name, but it's apt considering its impact on the balance of the jobs in the game. Well, in the recent letter from the producer live, we learned they're going to be addressing this tax in some way in patch 6.28, when we're slated to get some number changes to existing skills for job balance. That's in patch 6.28, by the way, not 6.25 like we originally thought. The unofficial translations posted an update with the clarification, but I'm sure a lot of people are not going to see that and are going to be expecting changes on Tuesday. Whoopsie! So I figured with them addressing this finally, it would be worth making a video to explain the design concept to the masses who may otherwise not know or care about it, and then discuss what the result of its removal would be. So first of all, what even is the ranged tax in Final Fantasy XIV? Simply put, it's the concept that ranged DPS jobs, and that is both casters and ranged physical, should do less overall damage because they can attack the boss from any range. Now, this doesn't always result in these jobs being way weaker than melee. It really depends on the individual patch and balance and the fights that we actually get. Not to mention you have to consider other design aspects. Black Mage, for example, even though it has a bunch of mobility tools, they do consider that a lot of its strength comes from standing still and turreting and casting a ton of really strong spells. They also have to consider utility tax, things like Red Mage's Raise and Barrier, or Summoner's Damage buff. And then with ranged physical, they have to account for pretty much everything. Range tax, utility tax, mobility tax, every single thing in existence has to be considered with them. But for this, that is the core concept that they're looking to tackle. Just that I can attack the boss from any range tax. Now, this isn't some magical concept that the community has made up. Only the name is really something that's community made. But throughout various live letters since A Realm Reborn, we've been told that this specific aspect is something that they consider. Even recently, we've heard about this. Back in A Realm Reborn, Bard was super strong because it had full uptime, complete mobility, no positionals. That's an old tax that we used to get as well, the no positional tax, or the positional buff, I suppose, however you want to look at it. And they still offered incredibly high damage. Back then, they tried to make the job design kind of work against it. You know, you lost damage by singing your songs, and that was supposed to be kind of your tax for the job that you were playing. But even factoring that in, a lot of the times, Bard was just the center of attention when it came to balance discussions. Summoner had its moments, Black Mage had its moments, but Bard was always a weird one. So it was clear they were going to have to do something else going forward, and what they tried didn't particularly work. Going into Heaven's War, they opted to reduce the mobility tax on the ranged physical jobs, as well as introduce Machinists by giving them cast times on the majority of their skills. This let them buff those jobs up, but they were still subject to the range tax, and we saw them really struggle with how to balance these jobs early on in the expansion. They missed the mark severely, having them be too weak, but then once they did number adjustments, they ended up being way too strong again, especially in some team comps with the way raid buffs worked back then. So what did they do? In Stormblood, they really doubled down on everything. They threw the mobility back in there. They threw the utility in there. They made sure that they had the range tax, and the ranged physical role as a whole has kind of struggled since then. So many times do I see discussions from people who do the numbers and all the crunching that you see and all these various discords and everything. And they would be like, is it worth 1% damage for your team to actually bring a ranged physical job? And sometimes the answer has been no. So realistically, the range physical role has suffered from this range tax probably the most. That doesn't mean the other jobs haven't, though. I think we've also seen Summoner and Red Mage suffer from it quite a bit in the past, but definitely less often than the range physical role as a whole. Now, you gotta remember, the main reason this tax existed was because boss hitboxes weren't that big. So there were often mechanics that just outright forced melee out of range of the bosses, or you had to have some really specific strategy or position in order to ensure that they could hit the boss more often. However, As we've seen with their new design, they're really trying to do away with that. The bosses have larger hitboxes, the mechanics often leave you able to still hit the boss most of the time, and so the range tax itself just loses all purpose. It's been losing its purpose anyway. I mean, positionals haven't been a thing, and I don't know that they've ever really made adjustments to the other jobs for the positional tax and the way the job balance has changed there. I think that's just something that silently disappeared and we didn't have to talk about anymore, much like most of the positionals in the game. Now, like I said, in the latest letter from the producer live, they acknowledge that because the boss hitboxes are so big and melee often don't need to lose uptime, that they probably need to do some number adjustments to address this. Now, they said address the whole thing. They didn't say they were buffing ranged or nerfing melee, so people are kind of just discussing which direction they think it's gonna go. I think this is gonna be a buff for all of the ranged jobs, even if just a small one for some of them, when we get these number adjustments on November 1st. No, I don't think it's gonna buff machinists massively and have them nuke the boss and suddenly be all correct. I also don't think that it's gonna completely resolve any issues people have with red mage at the moment, which often suffers from the utility tax department far more than the mobility or the range tax that we're discussing here. Black Mage, wouldn't be surprised if they didn't touch them at all, but I even think they could use a little bit of a bump if they're going to be making these changes. Overall, though, it at least shows some degree of awareness for how the community is, I suppose, providing their feedback about why these jobs feel weak and what elements we think are the cause of it. While this is just one of them that I think people are discussing, it is an important one that's likely to mean a decent number buff for quite a few jobs across the game. I'm hoping to see Machinists get a little bit more love than some of the other range physical, as I've spoken about in plenty of videos as of late, but overall, I'll take this as a first step towards something better. Now we just need to address the whole 2-minute thing I made a video about, but I don't need to get into that anymore. At the end of the day, if you're someone who doesn't care about most of this stuff, just know that if you play one of the jobs I've talked about today, there's a good chance you'll just be hitting a little bit harder in the coming weeks. If you are someone who does care about this stuff, much like me, you're probably like, finally, they're doing something, but they probably still need to do a decent bit more. Anyway, that's going to be a wrap for this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned. As soon as we get those numbers, we'll probably have another video about it. Anyway, thank you, and until next time, take care.